Sheep need a shepherd. Sheep need a shepherd. Those of you who have had anything to do with St. Mary's more than once know I love sheep. I collect sheep. You were greeted on your way in at the back table with one of my favorite sheep given to me by a person that I've known since she was 14, worked for me at the diocesan camp in Canada, and now works for a water and land rights agency in Canada. I brought my newest acquisition, which was bought for me by Melanie this week because she decided I was being too sassy and needed to calm down a little bit, so she bought me a sheep. Thank you, Melanie. I have my sheep socks on, so you can come see them after the service. I have my sheep socks on, see? Yes, okay. So you can come see them after the service, or during the service, I don't care. Sheep are my favorite animals. I've loved them since I was a child because they're cute and they're fluffy and they're pretty and they're pastoral, and I feel very calm watching them, but sheep definitively need a shepherd. Sheep are nothing like whatever they descended from hundreds of thousands of millions of years ago. They are completely domesticated, and they are reliant on the care of those who take care of them. They need a shepherd to guide them, to protect them. Usually, they also require other animals to help in this process, herding dogs, guarding dogs. Sheep are vulnerable. They are at risk of attack of wild animals. They are at risk of being out in elements for which they are not made. If you have an unsheared sheep with a heavy coat that gets stuck in a mud puddle, that can very quickly become a dead sheep because it gets so weighed down it flips over and cannot get out. Sheep need a shepherd. I don't know if you saw in the news just a couple of months ago, some Scottish farmers did a rescue of a sheep that had somehow made its way down a cliff onto a beach and couldn't get back up. And it was stuck on this beach, hiding in the rocks and eating seaweed for months. And every once in a while, a boat would go by and see it, but when they would get there, they couldn't find it because it was frightened and it would run away and hide. And so these farmers got together, and instead of taking a boat up, they came down the mountain, down the cliff, with a harness and a helicopter and a pulley system, and they came around and managed to get the sheep, hook it up, and haul it back up. And a few years ago, you might have seen the story in the news of the sheep found in Australia, which had wandered away from its flock. They never could find it. They finally found it in the woods, and it was about this big around because its wool had grown so much. Does anybody remember this news story? The sheep was almost paralyzed because they need to be shorn. And then when they finally did take it and get all that wool off of it, they had to keep it inside, and they had to protect its skin because it couldn't be exposed to sunlight right away, or it would have been killed. Literally fried. Sheep need a shepherd. It might seem odd that we have gone from appearances of Jesus following the resurrection to suddenly back before crucifixion with Jesus teaching about being a good shepherd. But I assure you there is good reason why we look at this passage during the Easter season, and that reason is because Jesus, in this little story that we read, refers to his resurrection, refers to laying down his life and having the power to take it back up again. And it is in this juxtaposition of the shepherd that sacrifices and the shepherd who triumphs that we hear about the power of the resurrection yet again. Last week, we had Jesus appearing through a closed door to the disciples, and we talked about honest reactions of doubt to the resurrection. We talked about our doubts, about how faith comes into doubt, and we talked about witness. Today, we talk about our shepherd and about how much we are like sheep. We're pretty cute. Sometimes we can be cuddly. And my goodness, can we be stupid? And we can also be vulnerable. We need a shepherd. So let's look at this passage. First of all, the Rhoda, how they divide up the scriptures, has really done a disservice to this passage. We started with chapter 10, verse 11, but this passage actually begins at the beginning of chapter 9. And it doesn't end until the end of chapter 10. That's a lot to read in a service, which is why it's broken up into pieces. It's a lot to preach on, too. So I just want to point out that what happens in chapter 9 is that Jesus comes across a man who is born blind. Jesus, the shepherd, seeks out this man, pushed aside from society, vulnerable, at the mercy of those who would help him. Jesus finds him and pulls him back into the fold, heals him, gives him life back. And when he is questioned about this, how he has the authority to do this, this blows my mind. You see someone heal somebody, and your question is how you have the authority to do it? And yet that was the question. And Jesus goes into this conversation about spiritual blindness and life blindness. This healing was complete. It was the physical healing of this man, and it was the life and spiritual healing of this man, that he was now part of the flock. He could go and witness. Jesus gave him his life back. And it is in that context that chapter 10 begins. Remember, the chapters didn't exist when this was written. This is all one story. Chapter 10 begins with, "Very truly I tell you." And Jesus goes on to talk about the gate, how the shepherd knows where the gate is, the protection of the sheep, and then we come to verse 11, "I am the good shepherd." Jesus is setting himself up here as the one who cares, who seeks and saves the lost, who left his home in heaven to come to a world where some people were looking for him, his sheep who knew his name, and a lot of people didn't care. It's the same as today. But the shepherd came for all of them. The shepherd found this blind man. The shepherd healed this blind man. The shepherd brought the lost sheep back into the fold and continues to try to draw in the other lost sheep there. And then we are foreshadowed to Jesus meeting Mary in the garden, the good shepherd showing up to ease the fear, to take care of his flock. What we can understand from this is the primary role of the good shepherd. A good shepherd protects the sheep. Jesus is our protector. We are called to faith, as we discussed last week. We are called to witness. Jesus gives us the power to do that. Jesus seeks us when we stray. Jesus pulls us back. Jesus offers protection. Jesus sends the herding dogs, that would be our brothers and sisters, who pull us back in when we need it. Jesus puts out the guard animals. Jesus comes to us in the midst of the pain and the garbage and the horribleness that this world can throw at us, because Jesus is the good shepherd. And the reason Jesus is the good shepherd is not just because he's a nice guy, not just because he takes his job fairly seriously, not just because he was raised to do this, but as he says, because I lay down my life in order to take it back up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up again. Jesus' death on the cross is not child abuse. Jesus' death on the cross is our shepherd willingly laying down his life to protect us. And the reason he can continue to be our good shepherd is because he had the power to take that life back. So if you look up at the top of page 3, or for those of you online, Robin is going to put up a comic, My Two Favorite Sheep. The shepherd is good because he lays down his life for his sheep. I like that. Yes. And he's good because he has the power to take it up again. Ooh, that is good. Think of Jesus in the garden, praying before his crucifixion, knowing what was about to happen, knowing the pain, the embarrassment, everything. Praying, Lord, take this from me if it's possible. But if it's not, Jesus chose to lay down his life because he knew the Father was with him. And when the soldiers came, Jesus walked out to meet them to protect his followers. None of them were arrested because Jesus immediately went forward and said, "It's me. I'm the one." And then Jesus took that life back and offered it to every single one of us. Jesus is the good shepherd because Jesus protects us before we are even thought of in our parents' heads. Jesus offers protection even when we're not wanted. Jesus is with us in the hard places, the rough places. Psalm 23 doesn't say Jesus leads us through everywhere perfect. It says even in the valley of the shadow of death, in the face of evil, we can sing praise because we know the end of the story. And it isn't what the world tells us it is. Jesus is the good shepherd because he sacrifices and because he rose again, and he offers that to each one of us. If you haven't ever watched, either live or on a video perhaps, a shepherd working a sheep, herding it with the herding dogs, I highly recommend going to YouTube and just doing a search for herding dogs. It is amazing. The control they have over these dogs, the obedience of the dog, the sheep trying to break out, and the dog stopping them with literally a look. The sheep stop and go, okay. Don't know if you've ever seen a guard dog, a farm guard dog. These are different from the herding dogs. These are the dogs that are employed at night to keep out robbers, thieves, to this day, wild animals. When our previous dog was a live bear, he was big. He was a Rottweiler, part Rottweiler. He was a big dog. He wasn't a working dog. He was a pet. He was dumb as a rock, but he was really sweet. And we used to take him to board. We would take him to a farm located just outside of Sittard in Limburg. It was a horse farm. And they didn't have herding dogs because of horses, but they did have guard dogs. And Bear, because Bear was dumb and obedient and just liked to be around the owners, he was allowed free rein in the farm because he would just stick with the owner. He didn't go where he shouldn't have been. Except for one day, as she was taking him through the paddock and the pen where the horses are initially let out into, he decided to go investigate the kennel where the work dogs were sleeping, the guard dogs were sleeping. He came back out of that there in about 10 seconds with his tail between his legs. Ooh! Now, they were in kennels. They didn't attack him, but they let it be known, you have no business here. The Good Shepherd protects the sheep. I brought a few sheep today. The fact is that if you come to my house, you can play a scavenger hunt. How many sheep can we find in Jenny's house? There's a lot. They're cute. They're pastoral. I find them calming. but I also appreciate the reminder not just of my need, but of my safety and well-being in the hands of my shepherd. Last year for my birthday, Jesse and Yonica, you all know Yonica is a very artistic person, gave me a picture. Robin's going to put it up on the screen for those of you online. Those of you here, I will put it up and I invite you to take a look at it, either coming up for communion or after the service. In this picture, we have a lamb caught in the mud. There's a forest, it's rather desolate, and right here you can see the image of the shepherd running to get the lamb. This is exactly how Jesus greets every single one of us, how Jesus seeks for us, searches for us, calls to us when we're stuck in the mud. And you know what I like best about this picture? Might shock you, it's not the shepherd. Don't get me wrong, I love the shepherd, but what I like best about this picture is the look on the lamb's face of, well, I messed up. And yet it's standing still. It's not fighting. It's not flailing, because it knows the shepherd is on his way. Jesus is the good shepherd. We are his sheep. He calls to us. He is running towards us. We just need to listen to his voice. And all that mud, it might not disappear. There's still going to be mud. But we will be able to get through it in the protection of our very good shepherd.